Hi, everyone. My name is Bill Daniels, and I'm the program leader for Native Seed Communities, which is a project of the Indiana Native Plant Society. We're very glad that you've joined us tonight to hear John Brittenham's presentation. I'm looking forward to it, and I'm sure you all are as well. Before I introduce John, I'd like to share with you some information about Native Seed Communities. Um, we we promote networks of native plant enthusiasts working together regionally to procure, to collect, purchase, to process if we've collected them ourselves, and then to propagate native plant seeds to increase the presence of these beautiful and ecologically appropriate native plants in all of our landscapes. We have a lot of resources on our INPS website. We've got a section on there, and it just at the top, the bar at the top, you just click on seeds, and you'll see quite a bit of information about growing native plants from seed, about native seed communities, and so forth. Um, for the best experience for everyone, if you'd please keep yourself muted unless you're invited to unmute. And also, if you have any questions, John has said he will allow, or he will take, maybe that's a better word, questions throughout his presentation. And Deb Howson is here, and she will be the moderator. And please pop those questions into the chat, and Deb will then field those and ask them at the appropriate time during the presentation. Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started. I'll introduce John. John has worked at Blue Heron Ministries as a restoration ecologist for the past 11 years. He holds a bachelor's degree from Huntington University and a Master of Environmental Science degree from Taylor University. John is passionate about growing native plants, creating native habitats, and sharing his love of the natural world with others. In his free time, you will find John spending as much time as possible with his wife and 4 kids and working to make his 5-acre property a small ecological gym. I now give you John Brittenham.
Well, hello, everybody, and I'm glad everybody could make it here tonight. So a little bit about myself. Yeah, I work for Blue Heron Ministries, and I've turned over the 12-year mark now. So one more year down, one more year older, I guess. But we do a lot of ecological restoration as part of Blue Heron Ministries, both on public and private grounds, and partnerships and grants, and for hire work as well. So some of you might be familiar with us already. But I think that's all I'll say about myself tonight, and then we can get ready. If you're ready for me to share my screen and get started, I'll go ahead and do that.
Yeah, let's go ahead, John.
So I'm going to talk tonight about native plants and the seed, getting things started, what you could say the easy way. And it's just my lazy way of doing it, because I like to spend as much time as I can with people and doing other things. As much as I love plants, I want to do it as efficiently as possible. I'd like to think efficiency is really what drives me, but I'm afraid it's probably more the least effort I have to put into things is more what drives me. So hopefully you'll gain some good information about the process tonight. But before I even get into that, you'll notice my presentation is more a broader topic of propagating and landscaping with native plants. And I'd kind of like to start off with just a talk on more or less, why do we do this, and what's the importance of using these native plants to make a difference, is what I think. So we're trying to do our best on this planet to make it not just a great place for us, but all the other organisms that live here as well. So a little bit about me in a presentation format. I said a little bit about Blue Heron Ministries, and so here's me and the family that I love so much. This is me and my 4 kids and my wife Emily a few years ago when we went backpacking. So love my family, but I also like honesty. And so this is more of an accurate depiction of what my family and I probably operate like on a daily basis. And if I did social media, I think my accounts would be filled with pictures more like this than these pretty little ones that most people put on. So I like the honest depiction, and I'll try to share that with everyone tonight as well, as much as I can. So I love doing work with native plants and with all kinds of groups, and especially with children. There's real joy in the experience that they have when they can touch those plants and plant those seeds. And I'll highlight some of the experiences that I've had doing that as well. I love growing the plants. It's kind of a natural outlet. When you fall in love with the plants, then you'll want to make more of them. And so you begin growing them. And this is my little nursery that I've put together at my house. I have about 5 acres, and this is in my orchard, and I had a little space to use, so I did this. So some of my pictures will be coming out of this tonight as well. And then of course, this is right in front of my house, so you have to put together a pretty little slide of what your house looks like. But again, I'm all about realism, so this is more what it looks like right now. So I started with the pie in the sky idea of all the different species I can put in there. And I had to think like 27 species, and it was just so great the first few years. And now about 6 years in, it's dominated by golden Alexander and New England aster. So I get a little yellow in the spring and some purple late in the fall, and the rest of the year is just kind of green. Not only that, but as most of you who work with native plants and landscaping will know, it is ridiculously tall. So much taller than I thought it would be. So this year I'm in the process of actually restarting. So I'm going to start over, and some of the plants I'm growing this year will go here. Especially I'm interested now in using the sedges, our native sedges, and growing those and using those to kind of keep a nice matrix underneath of some of our more showy and well-behaved native plants. Also, you might recognize this scenario, which I just took this tonight. We were kind of talking about this beforehand. So you start with a great landscape, and then all of a sudden it grows to 6 to 8 feet tall. And all those plants that were short in nature now have fertile soil. And there they are next to your house. And personally, my wife is not a big fan of this look. I don't mind. It's like the job I do. It's being out in the wild. So this too will get redone as I go on. But the rest of my property here, I get to play with the 5 acres, and it's just a real joy to be able to bring native plants back. And this was old pasture ground back 30 years ago when my parents bought it, and then we've slowly transitioned it back to probably about 2 acres of prairie and 1 acre of beech maple forest and some other things here and there. So I'll kind of start at the beginning and gloss over this hopefully pretty quickly, because I think most of you will have an impression of what this is. But what is a native plant? What I really want to highlight is it's an active member of a community that it grew up in, essentially. These plants are from here. So a native plant was one that interacted ecologically and evolutionary in these areas, and so they are adapted to our local conditions, and they play nice with their neighbors most of the time, unlike some of our invasive species, and they're an intricate part of that ecosystem and the food web and the habitat and all those elements. So native plants are really important then for all the wildlife and everything else that finds a home here, especially those things that were here prior to the human population being so abundant and like it is now. So why would we use native plants? You kind of think from our perspective at first, well, they're really beautiful. And I know that many of you would agree strongly that our native plants are extremely beautiful. They're low maintenance or lower maintenance, because they're definitely not low maintenance as low maintenance as people would like them to be, but they are in general a lower maintenance plant compared to some of our introduced ornamentals. So then they can save time and money as you're working on those areas, and they're a great alternative to your lawn. They actually have, some life in them besides this kind of pretty sterile lawn that we cultivate so well, and they provide habitat and food for wildlife. But that last part is, I think, the real piece that I want to highlight is that's why we're growing native plants, in my opinion. The other things are good, but when you get kind of the next level, it's not just what can they do for you and what do you like about them, but what are we giving back with these communities that we're living in and creating. So it's this kind of interaction. You can just walk out your front door, and you'll notice this is early on in my planting when I still had lots of diversity in there. And those animals are living all around you, and they're finding a place to call home. They're pollinating, they're surviving, they're having their young. I think this is what I've begun to look at as this is why we use native plants in our landscaping around us. So with that in mind, I'll give kind of a snapshot, and some of you kind of know this already, but just an update of kind of the bad news. Where are things at right now? And they're not great. So we had a study in 2019, and the largest study at the time, I think it may still be, of butterfly populations in North America. And it was just over the last 20 years. I'm actually part of the butterfly network that trains volunteers to go out and do this kind of work. So if you're interested in being part of a community that would contribute data like this, you can contact me at the end. I'd be happy to put you in contact with the right people. But they go out and do butterfly surveys. So for the last 20 years, they've done these surveys. And in our area right next door in Ohio, they found that the overall abundance has declined by 33% in 20 years. And that is just phenomenal in a negative way. That's a great reduction in the population of these insects. And butterflies are good indicators of overall ecological kind of the status of these habitats and ecosystems. They're very dynamic, and they respond to changes in the environment pretty readily. So they're good kind of indicator species, or can be. And then if you look at them globally, they've decreased 35% in the last 40 years. And insects overall are doing even worse. So they've declined 45% in the last 40 years, and we have this massive decline in the base of the food chain. These are the animals that sustain life for so many other organisms. They're the best converters of that energy from the plant material to be utilized then by higher food chain organisms that would eat the insects, or eat the animals that eat the insects. So a little more bad news before we get to some hopeful news that we can share is you've got pollinators in general. A lot of these are your bees, your native bees, and over half of them in North America are decreasing. 1 in 4 are at risk of extinction. And that's just the information we know. These are fascinating groups of animals, and we're just learning more about them all the time, at the same time that they're at risk and these populations are declining. But I think we have over like 240-ish species of just native bees in Indiana. And most of them we would just see as these solitary little bees, but they're very interesting, complex, and fascinating. And there's just not as much information that's been done on them. So if you're at a point where you want to donate your life knowledge to something that would be fascinating to study and useful, then this is one area of the many that are out there that you could dig your time into. So we kind of probably know this, but just to say it out loud, the cause of insect decline in general is mostly going to be habitat loss and fragmentation. So we're thinking, disturbances on the landscapes that are divided up. And so you just look at this. I did this presentation in Goshen earlier, and so I still have this slide in, but it's just a highly segmented landscape. So for animals to be able to migrate from one location to another, or emigrate or expand, there's a lot of obstacles there. And a lot of the insects decline is due to agricultural intensification. And so this is a graph that just starts in the change between BC and AD, kind of year 0 on our current calendar, and then goes up to 2016. And you'll see around the 17 and 1800s, just this drastic increase in as this spike shoots up. As our population has increased, so has the use of agricultural land. So the green is going to be pasture land, and then the kind of darker color there is going to be our row crops. And so this has drastically impacted the landscape as well. To today, over half of all the habitable land on Earth is used for some form of agriculture, and most of that being grazing. And you can just think of how heavily that impacts the globe and the world. Then you have climate change and disease. So lots of things that are impacting, and invasive species as well, all these organisms. So with the insect decrease, then you're going to have the decrease in other populations. So you have bird populations have decreased drastically as well. And this study in 2019 came out in Science, the journal Science, really well researched and documented bird decreases. But I put this slide up here not for the bad news, but actually for the good news that you can see in here, because we can make a difference and we can do it quite effectively and widespread. It just takes good decisions and policies. So if you look on this graph here, you have all the bird populations that are going to be all these ones over here. So grassland, boreal, eastern deciduous forest, and forested generalist, and all these different things. They're all declining except for one group, and that's your wetland birds. And the wetland birds increased since the 1970s because of our efforts to clean up our waters with the Clean Water Act and to preserve wetlands. And so you had a lot of wetland protection and restoration that went into effect, and a lot of organizations came together. And some of the most good that was done was actually from these hunting groups like Pheasants Forever and Ducks Unlimited that created space for all the wetland birds. So with the right actions and policies, we can make a difference. And that's the point that I want to stress is there is hope. We can make a difference. There is plenty of bad that we can focus on, but focus on the good that we can do. And raising these native plants and increasing native habitats is the thing that we can do to really help, because our population is continuing to increase. So this is a graph that just shows the general same starts at the, kind of BCAD change year 0, and then goes till projected into 2021 and where we are now. So our population is going to increase, and there are different ways and levels at which it's going to level off. But at least for the next foreseeable future, it's increasing. And so what we need a paradigm shift in the way that we are interacting with the land. So what can we do to help? We can start kind of small, and the fun things that are right around you everywhere is going to be things like you put in a native plant garden, a pollinator garden. So, do that small little area that you just don't want to mow anymore. And every year, those areas I don't want to mow anymore get to be more and more, because I get tired of that. And I like to expand areas I plant. So we're talking about creating habitat or improving habitat. So here again was when my landscape was more well-behaved, as you notice. So doing that, and it takes intentionality and it takes forethought so that you don't have that mess that I have now that may turn people off, that they won't use native plants because they think of them as a weedy mess. So I think it is important. There's good reason to push the boundaries, and I'm all about that as well. And it's okay to make people uncomfortable. At the same time, you got to work with people, and those that aren't ready for these massive landscapes that look pretty wild, you start small and you improve the existing habitat as much as you can. And so we're talking about putting pollinator strips next to roadways and things like that. So donating time, donating resources, donating money is a great way that we can really help out. There's always, you got thoughts of reducing herbicides and pesticides. That I'm guessing that's something that this group is already aware of and tries to do, but especially those pesticides, when it comes to the insects, they can be extremely problematic. And I've heard that in some of the nursery pesticides that they're putting on these plants, and even some of them are the native plants we bring home for our own landscape, have pesticides that can have activity for up to 2 years after they're after they're purchased or after the herbicide is applied. So looking into, are they using pesticides that are going to impact those insect populations that you actually want to attract? And so trying to be thoughtful and putting pressure on the industry to make changes. If we voice it loud enough, they will make changes. Volunteering is a great way to do, and I'm sure several of you do already, but I encourage it strongly. Get out there and get with fellow enthusiasts in nature and native plants and wild spaces, and volunteer in ways that make a difference, and donate to organizations that are doing the same. So this is a restoration project that Blue Heron Ministries did in LaGrange County. Mike Metz Fen, also known as Duff Lake Fen, was a 100+ acre wetland restoration that we did out there. And over the course of, it's been over 10 years now, we've had continual funding that's come in from here and there, and really turned this old pasture into a real gem of property. And if you've never been out there, I strongly encourage you to get up to LaGrange County near Howe and do the trails. They have an amazing trail system in there. And go in August when it's in full beauty, like you see here. If you just need to be kind of uplifted and see some of the good that is around here, that's a great place to visit if you haven't had that opportunity. And then support your efforts to fight global climate change and to battle and to make these differences in our carbon production and sequestration and using more renewable energy, and all these different efforts. Every little bit helps, and hopefully as we spread the word, then the change becomes greater and greater. This is the volunteers out there that are doing some seed collecting, and that's one thing Blue Heron Ministries has, an active volunteer outreach organization that does this every year. We get out every Saturday in October and do seed collecting of our native seeds in places where we can sustainably harvest the seed, and then we replant them in projects around Northeast Indiana. So what we really need is a new outlook on our inhabited spaces. And this is a sterile landscape that we're looking at here. This is, I see it as almost like, for many people, this is the ideal landscape. You got way in the background, you got the trampoline and the hammock. It's like a little heaven on earth for many people, but this is not supporting many organisms. It is a pretty barren landscape. So converting as much of this as we can to more habitat and beautiful and vibrant dynamic spaces that are supporting life is what we need to do. We've become extremely good at minimizing our pest species and weeds in our agricultural fields. And so again, we have extraordinarily sterile environments across much of the earth right now. So beginning to rethink how we are doing agriculture is going to be really important as we go forward. Can we do this in a more perennial fashion where it's permaculture, or at least we're creating habitat within these spaces? And that's going to be a big change. But I do see efforts that are being done that are really positive, and things are happening, and there is hope in this regard as well. But really, it's awesome just to see these things right around our own places and with the people that we know, and it's catching on. The native plant movement is increasing. I'm hearing things where nurseries are having, or people are having trouble finding the supplies they need from the nurseries, because we just don't have enough native plant nurseries right now in many areas, especially the Northeast right now. So increasing the amount of native plants we can put out there. It's kind of what this presentation is going to transition into next, just for our own sake, but also doing this in a way that's more readily doable to more people. So you may not be able to do this everywhere, but these landscapes that are just entirely converted are just inspiring to me. And I think this is the paradigm that we need to shoot for, is your entire landscape doesn't have to look like this, but getting a whole lot more of it to look like this than that lawn, I think is really the goal. So with all that, we want to make a difference. So let's talk about how to raise native plants from seed. And this is the method that I've been doing for several years now, just because I like to do things different and get out and experiment around. And so this is what I found works, and maybe some of this stuff will be valuable to you and what you might be able to do, or things you can share with others, and just take the kind of the scariness out of it, and just try things. Never be afraid to just try something different. And I'll talk about a little bit about how I've been trying things different as this goes on too, mainly late, because I'm always late to getting started planting. But let's talk about seed. So I am a strong advocate for collecting native seed or purchasing native seed or getting the source somehow from a local source, a local genotype, so local genetics, things that have evolved as close to your location as possible. So my first goal is always to have seed come from an area that the county is touching my county. But if not that, then at least the Great Lakes region at the broadest, if we can just try to stay within this regional locality, and especially think longitude and latitude. So you don't want to go very far south or north, but you can go pretty far east or west because of the climatic similarities as you go those directions. So that's one. You got your seed, you got to get your seed. And I love collecting, but then you always have to make sure you're doing that sustainably and you have permission to do so. Then you're going to have a good potting mix. And so this is you want it to be as weed-free as possible. I used to purchase potting mix and I still do, but I also started getting into using a combination of compost and pine bark fines. And for some of you, if you did hear this presentation before, then I was just going to toy with that this year. So this is the first year I've used that and it's worked really well. So it's kind of keeping it more local and hoping to avoid some of the peat collection and wetland damage and stress that you have to do to get some of the peat-based mixes, but those are very good mixes. So trying to find a mix as weed-free as possible. Then you got your containers. So I work in an industry that we do a project and we might get 2,000 of these things you see right in front of you. These are 2x2x4 cells that come in trays, 49 in a tray. And so I have a lot of these. So all my pictures you'll see are with these, and I keep them and I hoard them, and I get accused of hoarding too much, as you can imagine. But this year I ran out, so I was like, I need more. Is getting containers that are going to work for you. You can go many different routes, anything from saving back your yogurt containers or plastic cups, or even purchasing things that are similar to solo cups. All these things, you just got to find containers that work for you and that can hold the soil, hold the mix. And you need space to do it, and you need water, and of course sunlight. So you're going to have to think about how much sun you're getting in your space, but you don't need it to be ideal. You can push the limits in that too. And then you're going to need time. So think through when you want to do the planting, and then you got to have time for stratification. So stratification is when it is cold and dormant, and you want cold, moist stratification. So the mix that it's in is a little wet, and you're at refrigerating temperatures or below. So 40 degrees or below is typically what they say. A great resource for this, if you've seen it or haven't, I like to use it, is the Prairie Moon Nursery website. Has all the different species, most of the ones that you'll ever interact with of our native species. And they will give your stratification times. And it's usually going to be anywhere from 0 to 10 days to 30 days, 60 days. The majority, I think, fall within that 30 to 60 days that you need to have them stratified. Or I will say they suggest you have them stratified because you're going to hear a little later about how when I'm really late, I plant anyways and just see what grows. So typically when I'm doing this, what I'm doing is I'm scattering my seeds directly into my potting mix and just putting them outside, stacking those trays. I will stack them up to like 10 to 12 trays tall. I used to always water them and keep them wet, but now I've been pushing the limits and I just let them dry out and see what happens. And I've still gotten good results. So I'm scattering that seed right on those trays. I'm putting them outside. I'm usually getting this done by the end of January for most species is going to be good enough. And you'll have some that are listed like Ohio spiderwort or the blue flag iris are going to say they need 120 days. And the more time you can give them, the better. But I've found that you can get away with less time, but you're just going to have less germination. So the closer you are to those ideal times, then the more germination you're going to have. But if you put enough seed down, then some of them are going to germinate outside of this area that they tell you that they're supposed to. So I like to go out and collect. You'll see pictures with my kids in them. To be honest, it's kind of a struggle, and sometimes I pay my children to go and collect seeds with me because that'll get them outside. So, in this case, they volunteer, at other times they go out with me and they collect, but mainly it's me by myself going out and getting the seed. And I collect a lot of seed every year because I just love it so much. And I collect enough to just seed about 3 to 5 acres with a full seed mix every year, and I find an area that I can kind of donate that to. Um, but some of it I keep back. Very small amount is all you're going to need if you're going to do growing plants from seed. So you don't need much. And so even this big bucket that I am getting here is way too much seed to actually germinate it all in the method I'm going to talk about. But yeah, so you get out and you collect some seed, you find spots you can do it from your friends that got native plants, you share your seed with other people, and we start getting the stuff passed around. And I really strongly advocate, like I said, it is close to the genetic origin, the locality, so genetically local as possible. Really shoot for that. But if you can't, and you already have just maybe something you bought from the nursery and you don't know where it came from, then go ahead and use that around your landscape. But I'd strongly advise not putting that into any kind of restoration type situation. Around here, you have Spence Nursery in Muncie, and Heartland Restoration in Fort Wayne, and Riverview Nursery, and all these local areas. And they're going to have primarily our local genetic species when they sell their plants. I then clean the seed myself. So you see here, I'm really getting into it because I'm doing a lot. So I wear breathing protection, but I'm just hand screening all this stuff. We do that at work at Blue Heron Ministries. That's how we do it. We don't have any commercial hammer mills or fanning mills or anything at this point. And we just hand screen it. And so you can do this on your own. It doesn't take a very large screen, and it usually takes about 4 sizes of a screen. You can get a 1/2-inch screen, 1/4-inch screen, an 1/8-inch screen, and then your window screen mesh. And between those 4 screens, you can get most of your seed pretty clean. So this is the seed that I've cleaned. And so this is kind of what the final product looks like. You're going to have a lot of the fluffy part of the seeds going to stay connected. So think of your asters. They're going to come out with a lot of that fluff still on them. But for then going out and planting it, and with the method that I use, that I'll show you, that's really not a problem. So then you're going to need your potting mix. So this is the cheapest stuff that works really well, in my opinion. I got it from Menards. So again, a potting mix is better than potting soil because it's going to have less weeds in it. And so you just buy this potting mix, and I found that one of these bags covers about 3 of those 49 cell squares there. So that's what I used to use. I was going to get a picture of my stuff that I'm using this year, but I found I didn't actually take a picture of it. So like I said, what I'm using this year is the compost. So I get it from Dirt Wayne in Fort Wayne, and it's just finished compost. So it's local produced, lots of nutrients that you can put right back into your soil mix. And then I use pine bark. And I'll toy around with those different things because pine bark's probably coming from out west. You can also use coconut fiber. Some people have used that to good effect. And different seeds are actually going to want different texture. This mix that I use when I combine the compost and pine bark is a pretty coarse mixture, so it's really well drained. But your smaller seeds can get kind of lost in it, and they may not find their ideal germinating conditions. But for most of the species, it's worked pretty well. And then this is what it looks like before I plant the seeds. So I like to keep the soil about a 1/2 inch below the pot. That's give or take, because I do this really quick. I take that bag of mix and I dump it on like 6 of these squares all put together next to each other. And I just dump and dump and dump. And then I smooth it out by hand until all the cells are filled, and I do it on concrete. So then I can sweep it up at the end and continue to use it. And then I press it down. So for me, this is all the stuff that I use is really well drained. And so I press it down into those cells so it doesn't fall out the bottom. In my case, that's a problem because the bottom of these cells are pretty open. But if you're using a container that the media is not gonna fall out the bottom, then you just go ahead and put it in there and you don't need to pack it down. It'll settle in time as it gets watered, but you definitely want holes in the bottom of whatever containers you're using. And good sized holes so that the water can drain out.
Hey, John, this is Deb.
Go ahead.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Back to your mixture of soils, when you're
Yeah.
using compost, what is the ratio of compost to pine bark?
Oh, good question. What I've been using and seeing other people do is 50-50. So
Okay.
half and half. And that's worked really well for me. What I haven't got into yet is really finding the nutrient components of the compost. Because when I was talking to Brett, who runs Dirt Wayne, he said you're going to have different ones, have higher rates of nitrogen and phosphorus and all those different things. So that may play an effect into how you mix it, but everybody that I came across that's doing this method, they just do it half and half.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, thanks for the question. And feel free to keep asking questions if you got any. So then the actual planting process, I do it very quickly, and I just grab a bunch of seed in my hand and I go over the tray, kind of like you're spreading seasoning or chicken feed or anything that you're just kind of letting it fall out of your hand. Oh, I was going to say, I like to put a little hole, probably like a 1/2 inch hole in the middle. So you see them all, they're kind of concave and they go down into the middle of it. And that's going to help me when I'm done fill them up with getting dirt over the top. And again, as you get to know your seeds, some of your really fine seeds, you won't have to do this. If you know Penstemon digitalis or your Penstemon seeds, or like I think even the mountain mint seeds, they actually like to be on the top of the soil. So you might just spread them right on the top. But the majority, I'll be honest, I do all of mine the same way, even though like I'll say that you're supposed to do them different ways, and that's what you'll find in the literature. But the way I do it, spreading so many seeds so quickly, there's going to be lots of seeds in different locations in the soil. So they'll all kind of find happy spots. So then I sprinkle the seeds in there very quickly and very messy. So one thing I always try to do is if I'm doing multiple species, I want these only do one species at a time and only have that cell up there, that 49 cell or however many I'm going to fill. So if you have like multiple cups, since it's so quick and some of them are floating in the wind, you don't want them right next to each other when you first set them up. You want to put just one up at a time. So I like to do it at a table because I'm having back problems as I get older. So I put it high and then I kind of do it there and just one species at a time and then move on. But if I'm doing like 5 or 6 trays of the same species, I do them all at once. So I'm just scattering a bunch of seeds. So here my daughter's scattering seed on the top as well. And you don't have to be precise, and that's what makes it quick. So, sometimes if you're doing gardening or different things, you might want like 4 seeds per cup. But in this case, you're maybe getting anywhere from 10 to 20 seeds per cup as I spread it. I have learned over the years, the one thing that I'm beginning to be more cautious of is some species are really successful at germinating and some are not. And so you can really overload species that struggle to germinate and then put a little less in of the species that germinate really well. So a lot of my asters germinate really well. Penstemon is actually one, if I plant it in time, then it goes crazy. And then all those small seeds, it's just hard to get a few seeds in there. So I just spread them in there pretty thick, and then I drum the top of them. I just smack my hands up and down on them, wear gloves, because in my scenario, because these edges can be kind of traumatic on your hands if you got bare hands. But you just drum them, and that vibrates the soil until it flattens out. And so then, like I was talking, the areas that have holes in them fill in pretty deeply. So if you have larger seeds, like some of your silphiums, or even like the purple coneflower, it may like to be just a little deeper. And so then it finds where it wants to be. And then some will sit on the top and they won't germinate. And some will sit on the top and they will germinate. So this is what it looks like when I'm done. This is what I did with the kids over at one of the schools I was working at. And this is, if you can see it, hopefully it comes through on your screens. This was butterfly milkweed. And it's just a hot mess. There's seeds everywhere in there. And that's fine with me. When I'm done, some of those cells are going to have a lot of seeds on them, some of them aren't. And the more meticulous you are, then the better, more equal germination you're going to have. So if you like to take your time and you're not planting thousands of cells, like I sometimes get carried away and try to do, then you take your time and you can try to do more of that 4 to 10 seeds per each little cup that you have. But in my case, it's very quick.
So John,
Yes.
while we're talking about your soil and such, on the compost, do you sterilize the compost, or is it purchased, already
Good question.
sterilized?
Yeah, it's going to be, so mine is essentially purchased. I won't tell you that I got it for free this year, because I know Brett and he's really nice to me. But you can usually get it for, I think they were selling it for like $50 a cubic yard or something. Most of it does get sterilized because of the high temperature that commercial composting happens at. So a lot of it is sterilized. But you wouldn't want to use it for food sources. So if you're going to eat out of this mix, don't do it where you would eat out of, just for regulation and safety's sake. Most of the time you would still be all right. But that's like the disclaimer that I have to put out there. But other than that, yeah, I don't sterilize it myself. I was a little worried about how much weed seeds it would have in it. And I was anticipating it having a pretty high amount. And it was not much higher than the commercially bought potting mixes. Those are definitely cleaner and have less weed seed, but the compost and pine bark was very weed free. It has like 2 species. One of them's a grass, and it's probably like quackgrass, well, not quackgrass, but crabgrass or something. And it comes up, but it's easy to identify and pull out. So, if I had a really weedy batch, I would think about sterilizing. But yeah, I think in general, it's getting pretty well high temperature sterilized at a commercial facility. If you were using your own compost, say you're doing your own compost, you would want to sift it, and then you may have to sterilize it, but I would say just try it and see how it performs for you. But make sure to sift it, because otherwise it won't mix very well.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So then you need that space like I was talking about, and anywhere you can find some sunlight and access to water. I strongly recommend having it close to where you can set up an automated sprinkler on a timer, so you don't forget, kill all the plants that you spent this time with. That's what I do, but there is a real joy to watering your plants too. So I know some people, they don't put them on sprinklers just so they have the opportunity to go and water these plants. Sometimes every day, sometimes not. Like you've heard me allude, my time usually goes elsewhere. So I have these on sprinklers. So that's where you'll see the hose, and some of the pictures later you see. I buy really cheap sprinklers. The one picture I had earlier, I had like these mist lines set up, but since then that was just too complicated, too much work, and too many things to go wrong. So I buy these like $3 sprinklers from Menards, and I have like 8 of them set up throughout this whole long stretch, which is about, I think it's about 35 feet is what this stretch is that you see in front of you. But you don't need to do it like that. Just find an area and put it on the ground. So here's what they did at the school that we worked at. And we did it in the winter. It was March, so late winter. And then they just put it out on some tarps. I like to use plastic because the roots will not root through. If the plant is put on a fabric of some kind that the roots can get through, you don't have to water it as much while they're there, because it will find its way in and they will grow better. But then when you go to move them, harvest them, and want to plant them, you'll have to break those roots off. So I like to put them on plastic and have it so it holds just a little bit of water, not too much. But so the water kind of sits on it, and then that helps. The roots will get down in there and they'll be happy on that plastic, and they'll soak it up pretty well. And by the end of 1 year, they usually haven't grown out of the pots that much. But they will get down there. So I would suggest an impermeable layer to put down. Here's like, this was just a store-bought from Menards tarp, kind of a medium duty tarp. And I put down, this the first year I didn't have much stuff growing into it. If I would have reused it this year, then the roots would have gotten down into it. So in this case, then I put some plastic over it when we did it earlier this year.
All right, so I'm going to interrupt you again, John.
Yep, go right ahead.
So earlier in your presentation, you talked about when you were prepping the trays here, you stack them, sometimes as many as 10, 12 high.
Yep.
I presume that's in the winter. So,
Yep.
and then you are unstacking at this point?
Yeah, as
Okay.
soon as I'm seeing, you'll have some indicator species, like for me, it's lupin. I want to kind of watch my lupin seed, and once it starts to germinate, then I put it out there. But really, as soon as the frost has gone off of the soil, you could put them out. The only reason not to put them out earlier, as soon as you do put them out, you're going to want to keep them watered, because as you get closer to the growing and germinating point into the year, then you want to make sure they're constantly moist. So once I do put them out, then I make sure they're constantly moist.
Okay. So, but when they're stacked, you aren't, oh, I see, there's a picture there. So
Yeah.
the snow is pretty much kind of doing the watering, right?
Yep. And this would be kind of early on, I'd stack them just 2 to 4 high. So now I go higher. And on a good snow, I would stack the snow right on top of them. And so if you got a spot where you can just put your snow and shovel your snow off your driveway and put them on your plants, then it's going to keep them wet longer, and it'll keep that moisture better. So that's another thing you can do. And if you have the time, it is best to keep them moist throughout the winter. That's the best case scenario. So if you can, just occasionally, if it gets dry, put some water on them. That's helpful as well.
Okay, great.
So I'm really good at talking a long time, so I'll try to get through here at the proper pace, but I think we're doing pretty good. So now I will give you, this is just going to be just for fun, because planting is for all ages, and I love this. So you got toddlers, you got 3, 4, and 5-year-olds out here, and this is the school I was talking about earlier, and so we got them all out. And my kids have done it. And so since you don't have to be real careful with it, and it can be messy, you can do it with kids and young kids. And it's just really fun. They will love playing in the dirt as much as they do anything else. And that's great. They spend most of their time filling up the cells with the potting mix, and that works really well. And then I'll plant with them. And sometimes, I'll plant over at the end and put seed in the cells that didn't have seed, or maybe grab those huge clumps of seed that they threw all in one spot and spread those out. But you wouldn't have to, you still would get results. But yeah, I like to kind of, after the kids are done, I kind of touch it up a little, but not much. But I've done it with all kinds of age groups, from the elementary school kids to the middle school type of kids to the really, really mature kids that are retired now. So we do this for all different kinds of ages, and it's a fun activity. And if you can do it in a way that if you're in a position where you get volunteer events together, even if it's like a community event, having the same people come back that are the ones that planted, then have them come back about this time of year and do the weeding. So you're going to have to do some light weeding. Like I find you just have to do it once and then you're good. And like June's a good time. The end of June is usually a good time to do that round of weeding. And other than that, these plants are going to grow pretty thickly in there, as you can imagine, with all that seed spread. And so that actually helps reduce the amount of weeds that are going to grow in these areas. So what's it look like in the end? So here's kind of some of the finished products that I have. So this is around probably late July is in this picture. And then here's August, right before, this is the day that I took them to the project that I was going to use. So you're just growing them for 1 full year. You don't have to start them in the greenhouse. They're starting at the same time that plants are just going to get happy based on soil temperature and outside conditions. And then if you can get them in the ground in September, it's ideal. It's really good. Or you can overwinter them and plant them the following spring as well. Or if you're really behind, like I find myself frequently, you can plant them 2 springs when they're completely root bound in the pot and they're hard to get out. But I found that, it's better to put them in the ground than not do anything, and they'll still do okay. So here's a project that worked on. These are all plants that are grown on this method. So by the time you get done, and they look really good. And some of them are going to be pretty stunted. You can weed out the native plants that are in those containers and just choose a few, and then they'll grow faster and better. I don't do that. But it is one thing you could do. The other thing you can do is once they're growing pretty well and you got your germination and they've got a few leaves on them, you can transplant out of your pots and put in new pots. So then you could fill them up. And just like a lot of the more commercial operations, or kind of the traditional way that I was taught, is you would have like a flat seed container, and then once they're big enough, then you transplant them. You can do that out of these cells too. So you can either cut them off with scissors or pull them out to thin them out, or you can just let them all grow, and then they're going to be a little more stunted. But I found once you get them in the ground, you kind of get, nature finds the survival of the fittest, and 1 or 2 of them will get really big and outcompete the rest. Or you can transplant them.
So John, this will be my last interruption, and then
we'll keep interrupting me. That's no problem.
Well, we are reaching the end of time, so I wanted to kind of give you a quick, we got about 8 or 9 minutes. But I want to go back to you're leaving this, the seedlings into the pots up here or such. Have you done any thinning of the seeds that are in each individual cell?
Yeah, I did that 1 year, and I kind of plucked them out, and then they grew better and bigger. So if you have the time to do that, then, and you only need a limited amount, say you calculated what you needed, then it's really good to thin them out, and that works really well. But that does take extra time, and so frequently I do not do that.
Okay. So you've left them there, and so at times, have you done any transplanting because they are getting big in midsummer?
Yeah, what I do, let me skip ahead to looking at, these are just a lot of the projects that we've done, but I got some good pictures. Here's like the group that's doing weeding. And so this is what I'm doing this, in fact, this Thursday at Blue Heron Ministries. If anybody wants to come out and be part of it, 10:30 at Blue Heron, on our website, maybe. But anyway, so we're weeding here, but at this point, so this is right now, then we're also transplanting. And the ones I transplant are the ones that don't germinate well. And so if I get like 2 or 3 in one pot, then I will divide that and just put 1 in each of the pots until I can't divide it anymore. So that is how I've done it. And if I do want more of a species, like I'll be doing that this year with my sedges, then I will be transplanting from these pots. So there might be 10 growing in there, and I might spread them out through 3 or 4 or 5 different pots and transplant.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And so now we are 6 minutes to the top of the hour.
I'll jump to the very end, and what I'll just show. So this is kind of what they look like right now. And this is kind of fun. This is where I want to say, push your limits. So this is March Blazing Star, Neatris spicata, and this is supposed to be a 60-day stratification period, but I planted it on April 14th, and we got almost no stratification days after this because it was such a warm spring. And this is what my plants look like. So they did pretty well. But you'll have other ones where penstemon usually does awesome. You only had a few of those. So this is a few, the penstemon coming up. Here I had Pulver's root, usually does great. It's supposed to have no stratification time, so it should have done well, but I think maybe the soil's too coarse. So this is what some of my pots, and this is way less than usually I get, but just to kind of show you what I had this year. And this one was New England Aster. Again, usually I have a really great, but because I didn't give it enough stratification time. But then This one's a tall ironweed, and then we have white meadowsweet. It did pretty well. And here's kind of some of the ones that I planted in February and a little more of what I'm used to. So even spiderwort over here is doing pretty well, but my irises, almost none of them came up, but these are all purple cone flowers and they're doing really well. And sometimes that's the kind that I will pull some of these out to do at the end. But I think with that, we'll call that the end of my talking. And then if anybody else had any questions for this last little bit.
I have one more question. So you had some late planting, no cold stratification, which is promising for me because I'm the number one procrastinator on the planet.
Yep.
I'm sure of it. But where have you stored your seeds?
It was in a bag,
okay,
on a shelf in just a shed. So it was dry. It
okay,
was cold. So it would have some potential cold stratification, but as far as I'm to understand, it really has to be cold and moist to do the stratifying. And so, yeah, it was, and for a long time, for about a month, it was kept in my breezeway because I was saying, I'm going to do it the next day. I'm going to do it the next day. And it took a month to get to it. So yeah, that's how I was storing it. It's clean, it's dry, it's in a bag. It's in a bag inside of another bag. And that's how I stored it over the winter.
well, that's kind of promising.
Yep, I'd say throw it out there and see what happens.
Yeah,
and even now, if you put it in even like right now, some of it would grow, but it wouldn't get very far before the end of the season. So you'd have pretty stunted plants. They would survive the winter at this point, but you'd probably want to wait and plant them in the spring or something, or put them in the ground in the fall when they're small. That's fine too. But the more robust, the better chance they got.
I was actually thinking that I might try some of the grasses and sedges because they're grasses and sedges, and I thought they might have a better chance of actually doing something.
Sedges are usually stratification time ones, so they a lot of them require the 60-day according to the records. And I have found that some of them don't come out of dormancy very well, but yeah, I would try them. I would try them.
Better than just sitting there and maybe go bad. So okay.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And put them, and that's how we kind of learn new things. And see, I don't have one of my sedges right now, but yeah, and this is a fun one that we did last year. So these were the plants that we grew, and then this is when we pulled them at the beginning of September, and then we went to Ryan Park Elementary School in Angola, and the kids all got together and planted this pollinator garden, and so that's what it looked like in the end. So I think that's as fun of a note as anything to kind of end on. If we need to, I'm around as long as we need to as well.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, John. It's been wonderful. Great information, and gives me hope on all the seats that I have sitting everywhere.
This is the presentation for procrastinators.
Yeah, that's what you need to call it. So I will turn it back over to Bill to wrap up. And if anyone has questions, I did post John's email into the chat, so you'll be able to find that. Thanks again.
Let me bring my microphone down. Thanks so much, John. That was excellent. And that truly is an easy way. That's easier than even how I do it and so forth. And I really do appreciate that insight because I'd never seen that done. We use the same pots in both of the organizations that I help with, the Sycamore Land Trust Nursery, as well as MC Iris for the fall plant sale. And so anyway, we might venture into that area if some of my teammates are game to do that. But we'll go ahead and wind up the meeting for now. If anybody has any additional questions regarding the presentation or native seed communities, Deb has shared in the chat the links. You can also contact me directly as the program leader at seed@indiananativeplants.org. And then I can respond back to you. Also, we invite you to be a part of our Facebook group if you aren't already a member. We've got right at 3,000 people that are that follow the group, and the more the merrier. And we really try to focus it on the propagation of native plants from seed, but also in highlighting those organizations that are mobilizing our communities to do this. So anyway, you're welcome to be a part of that group. Our next presentation I'd like to make you aware of really quickly. It's on Tuesday, July the 30th at 5:30 p.m. Eastern. We will have Ellen Jacart and Ann Kamen. They are with MC Iris, the group that I just mentioned, and they will be sharing with us on how to set up a native plant sale for your organization. This group that I'm a part of, they are truly experts at it. They've been doing it now. I think this is our third or fourth year, but if you're interested at all in doing a fundraiser for your organization, I highly recommend you joining us. Thanks again, John, for your informative session. Really do appreciate it. But one thing I thought was interesting, I saw the corona. I think that's your son. You start them young. It looks like, during one of the sowings. Anyway, but no, really do appreciate it, John. Very, very helpful. And Deb, as always, thank you for helping out, and you're much appreciated. So it was good to see you all tonight. We'll go ahead and sign off for now. Happy growing natives from seeds. Bye-bye all.